Hi, everyone. Thank you for logging on and joining us today. We're going to give it a few minutes until we start so we can have all of our attendees join. So we're going to start in just a minute. Thanks for your patience. Hi, everyone who's joined us now. Thanks for joining. We're going to start in just a minute. I'm going to wait for everybody to log on and we'll get started soon. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us and making the time to log on to our Comeet Best Practice webinar. I think we're just about ready to get started, so I'm going to go ahead. I just want to add that we're recording this webinar and we're definitely going to share this recording with anyone who's registered and, of course, attended the webinar. So nice to meet everybody. My name is Liel and I'm a Customer Success Manager here at Comeet. And today we're launching our new webinar series discussing reporting and best practices. What we really want to achieve in this webinar series is to give you the tools and the knowledge on how to best utilize Comeet for your reports, how to align data, and what different best practices you should implement. Later on, we're going to be meeting in 2 weeks for reviewing a new report that we're releasing in beta, an open position dashboard. And in a month from today, we're going to meet for another webinar talking about sources and the various reports that we have available. So the goal of today, as I mentioned, is to help you align your data. The more you organize your data, enter the data in the correct time frame, and align your best practices and hiring processes within Comeet, that way the reporting will be more reliable, will be aligned, and you'll be able to use this reporting also to analyze your hiring process, to improve the different processes, and really get a better understanding of where things are at and where we want to go. So let's get started. Today's agenda, we're going to start by talking about step templates. We're going to discuss openings, position fields, and we're going to talk about changing and adding a candidate to a position, the different options and how this impacts reporting. And last but not least, we're going to talk about disposition reasons. So I'm going to be showing some of the presentation in slides and some of it through the system. I'm going to turn off my camera just for now so we can all focus on the presentation. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to start out with step templates. Step templates, for any of you who have started using the system recently or have been using the system for quite a while, this is a menu that you can find under your settings. We're going to take a look in just a second. And the reason why step templates is such an important topic for us is because this is how we can make sure we have a standard hiring process. This will help us have the ability to see how many candidates are in each step and at each stage in the hiring process. And that's going to be our main question when we come to look at reports. We want to look what the status of the hiring process is, if it's for one position or for the whole department. And once our step templates are aligned, we'll be able to see exactly how many candidates we have in each step. And there won't be any duplicates or, a few steps that basically mean the same thing. So let's see how this looks in the system. So I'm going to go to the company settings by clicking on the top right-hand corner with the company name, and I'm going to click settings. Now, as a reminder, our settings are available for anyone who's an admin or owner in the system. When you scroll down on the left, it's under data. Now, the step templates is essentially a menu that includes all of the different steps that you would like to use in your hiring process. The steps that you have here in the settings aren't going to be used necessarily all together in each hiring process, but we want each hiring process to be able to select the steps from this menu. All of the steps are organized by stages. You can see the sourcing stage, application screening, and so on. For example, we have also the assessment, advanced interviews. And the stages are reflecting the chronological order of the process. So if I have a technical interview at the beginning of the process, I might want to make sure that that step is under the application screening stage instead of the advanced interview stage. So our recommendation to get started is to review this menu. If you've been using the system for a long time, I'm going to guess here and say that you probably have a lot of different steps here. Maybe some of them are being used and maybe some of them aren't. And in many cases, we'll see systems that have been in use for a while, and then you'll have several steps that basically mean the same thing, and just the naming is a little bit different. Sometimes we'll have spelling mistakes. And the idea here is to go through this menu, obviously consult your hiring team and your recruiters, and get an understanding of what are the main steps that are being used across your processes. It's okay if different recruiters use different steps, but we want this menu to have all of the steps in one place. So there is a drop down that you use when building your position workflow. You can go over the steps. If there's a step that you're not using, for example, it's being used with 0 positions, you can click here on the 3 dots. You can either edit it or delete it. If it's a built-in step in the system, you'll also have the option to archive it. You also have the option to add steps. So if you have another step in the application screening that is maybe an online test, you can click add step, make sure it's in the correct recruiting stage, and then give it a step name. You also have the option to mark it as required to hire, meaning once it's in the position workflow, every single candidate must complete this step in order to be hired. And we have the default step details. This is a good time to mention that we have 4 different kinds of steps. The go, no-go step is mostly for CV screens. It's basically giving you the option to mark if a candidate will move forward or not. We have our interview steps. This will allow you to schedule an interview and fill out an interview evaluation. Our administrative type steps can be really used for whatever you need. If it's for sending out an offer, if it's communicating with a candidate, any kind of administrative task that you want to mark completed along the way. And for whoever's using our offer letter feature, we're going to make sure that the offer type is selected as well. If you're not using our offer letter feature, our recommendation is to go down to the offer step and make sure that you add an offer step that is an administrative step by the recruiter in this case, because we want to make sure that you're correctly documenting the process. And this would usually mark the system and the workflow and say, I basically sent the offer to the candidate. That's why it would be an administrative step like you can see here. And different companies, do their own thing. You can have different steps. If it's send the offer, if it's a candidate signed, you can really play around with the system. That's what's really great about Comeet, that it can be really customized to your needs. But along with the customization, we want to make sure that things are aligned and that we're not using different namings for the same step. For example, reference call and reference check. So after you've gone over this menu and you've aligned all of the steps, removed, edited, added whatever you've needed, our strong recommendation is to mark required at the top of the page. This means that each recruiter that's going to be opening positions, creating workflows, will need to choose one of the steps from this specific menu. So let's see just how this looks in the actual position. So if I'm looking at the product manager position, I can see that I have a CV screen recruiter. It's the first step. So this is the name of the step, CV screen recruiter. And if I click on it, this dropdown is essentially the step templates that we saw before. So you can see that I can use different steps at each part of the workflow for different positions. I'll use different kinds of steps. Not every position will have an on-site interview. Not every position will have an interview peer, so you can edit workflows accordingly. The idea is to just use this dropdown. Like I mentioned before, we have the types of steps. That's where you choose the type of step. So go, no go means the candidate moves forward, yes or no. The phone interview will allow you also to schedule the interview, to decide what kind of interview it is and add a Zoom link or a custom link to other online meetings. You have the interview questions functionality for this as well, and administrative tasks. For example, a reference check could be an administrative task that the recruiter would mark completed once they've done it. So that pretty much sums up the step templates. I just want to go back to the presentation. These are basically the instructions that we covered, right? So you're going to go to settings, step templates, review the different steps, edit, add, archive, or delete, and mark them as required. And just sort of like a little screenshot from our reporting that we'll be discussing moving forward, and I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, are already using our reports. This is a snapshot of the hiring activity dashboard, and as you can see here, we're seeing all of the candidates in progress by the stage reached, and we also have a table below that's split up by position. So this is essentially where you'll see all the candidates by step, and that's why we want to align the steps in the system, make sure that they all belong to the correct stage. And the step templates will be even more important once we discuss our open position dashboard next week, because then we'll be really diving into one specific position and viewing the status of the candidates. So that's definitely something you should put on your to-do list. Next, we're going to talk about openings. If I have to say that this is the most, what's the most important topic of today, this is probably it. The openings is really where all of our hiring KPIs are measured based on the openings and the dates entered into Comeet. You're also going to be looking at the candidate experience through these dates, because we're looking at the apply to hire, which I'm going to explain about in just a sec. Consistency of documentation is really important. We want to make sure that all of the openings, all of the hires are marked in the same manner. For example, if we're marking the candidate as hired on the date that they sign the contract, or on the date we send the contract, or on the date they arrive at work, those are 3 different scenarios. Our recommendation is to mark a candidate hired on the date that they sign a contract. Okay, that's how we're going to also measure the time to hire. Using the opening dates, editing them, and using them accordingly can help you keep track of future openings and your hiring goals. And of course, a really important part of this is to be able to use the data to report your achievements, showcase the HR team effort in regards to how many openings you have, how many openings you've filled in the past month, and of course, how long it's taking you to do so. So just to explain a little bit openings and how we're using it in the system. These are the questions that we're going to be asking when looking at the openings. We're going to want to know how many openings are we trying to fill at this time. It's not enough to know how many positions we have, because we could have several openings in one position, and that obviously impacts the volume of the work. We want to know how long it's taking us to hire candidates, how long candidates are in process, and the bottom line, how long does it take us to fill a position? So all of these questions are really important really important questions, and the answers are all in the system as a result of the openings that are managed. So I want to explain just how we use the data, and then we're going to go into the system and see some examples. So on the day that you open a position for the first time, one opening is going to be opened. I think maybe showing the system now would actually be better. So let's go ahead and do that. When I choose to open a position for the first time, I'm going to go ahead to the blue plus sign and click position. In this screen, as most of you know, we'll choose a position name. We'll need to choose a reason for the new opening, if it's a new hire, a replacement, or a temporary replacement. Of course, we're going to fill in the hiring manager and the recruiter. We can start with a basic template or use any one of our other positions as templates. Now, once I click add, a position will open up and one opening will be created automatically. The default of the system is the open date, the date that you open the position for the first time, and the default expected hire date is 60 days forward. Okay, that's the default on a system level. And these dates allow us to calculate the time to hire. So when a candidate is hired, we essentially match them with an opening. We can see an example here, right? So this is an opening that's been filled. We have Gary Cohen, who has been hired. We opened this opening, for example, in October. Okay, he applied in July. He was hired in January and he started in March. Obviously, these days don't reflect reality. This is just a demo account showing you some examples. But the idea here is that I want to explain how we're using the opening dates to report your KPIs. Our apply to hire is from the open date, okay? Is from the open date until the candidate was hired. We're using this to show how long it's taken you to fill a position, fill an opening. The apply to hire will be calculated from the moment the candidate applied until they were actually hired, marked hired in the system. And the time to onboard is looking at the open date of the opening until the actual start date of the candidate. So as you can see, this is really important information. This is all of the KPIs that you're going to be reporting about and looking at on an ongoing basis. And that's why it's really important to manage the openings correctly. Now, when I talk about managing openings correctly, there's a few things we need to take into account. If I have an open position with one opening, I fill this opening, I mark it as hired, that's great. But that still means I have an open position with no openings left because I've hired one candidate. In this case, you either want to go ahead and add another opening if you're going to continue hiring for this specific position with the current candidates that you have, or you're going to go ahead and close this position because you're no longer recruiting. We can see here another example. Okay, this is a product manager position. I need 2 hires. Again, if it's published, that means that candidates are applying. If I'm not intending on hiring any of one of them, I might as well go and close it and not publish it. But if I do want to hire candidates, I want to go ahead and add an opening. Now, the reason we want to add openings in advance is because if I were to go now and hire a candidate for the product manager position, since I don't have an opening that is currently open, the system will create an opening with an open date of when you hire the candidate, essentially saying that the time to hire was 0 days. Now, as much as all of us want to meet our goals and hire candidates, usually we're not going to be hiring within a day or two. And that's why I want to have these openings open in advance and not case by case when we hire candidates. Here we can see another example of an office manager position that I know ahead of time that I have 2 openings. I want to go ahead and mention that in any case, whether it's the first opening or additional openings that you've added, you can click on them and edit them. If I want to say that the open date is a bit different than what I initially entered, maybe I'm entering an opening that opened a week ago and I want to go back and fix it. And another really nice thing that you can edit is the expected hire date. Because as a default, like I mentioned, the system is using 60 days as an expected hire date. That means that every single opening that's been open more than 60 days will show up in your reports as being delayed, basically openings that haven't been hired on time. So if you have a position that it's very urgent for you to recruit for, you could change this even maybe to 45 or 30 days of expected hire. And when you have those kind of positions that you know are very challenging to hire, to find the right person for the job, then you might want to go ahead and mark it as a 90-day or even 120-day hire. And that way you can also keep track, whether it's of a hiring plan, your future openings, in addition to measuring your KPIs. So that's pretty much it about openings. I just want to show you an example before we finish about the hire screen. Okay, so this is what happens when we mark a candidate as hired. We go to their status and change it to hired, and then we need to fill in these details. So just like I mentioned before, we're always going to match a hiring with an opening. It will show you when this opening was initially opened. You'll have the application details. This will be default in the system. Okay, you probably won't want to go ahead and change this. You'll have the source and the hire date. So the hire date is when the candidate signed the contract. That's our best practice. And the start date should be the day when they're first arriving for the job at your company. Okay, so this is how we enter all of the details. Once you go ahead and click hired, the opening will be filled, and now you'll have to decide if to close the position or add a new opening. Great, so that's pretty much it for openings. The last thing I want to talk about in this context is that you definitely have the option to go back and edit openings. So if I'm just hopping back into the system, if I want to look over here at the product manager position, I have 2 openings that I've hired for. But if these dates haven't been entered correctly, maybe the hire date was actually the start date and I entered the same date twice, Maybe the open date wasn't correct. I just want to remind you that you can make a decision, for example, within your company that you want to go ahead and align all of your data for Q2. You can go ahead into these openings. You can edit them in terms of the open date and the expected hire date. And you can also edit the hire date itself and the start date. So this is really important for all of you to know that even if things haven't, been perfect until now, we can definitely go back and change some of them. And of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of our session today, really communicate this with the recruitment team, decide on your best practices, and start implementing them. Great. These are just two examples, snapshots from our reports, from the hires report. You can see, for example, how many candidates have been hired, and then you'll be able to see your average time to hire and average apply to hire. Obviously, this example at the top is not a great example because we don't want to be, hiring within 150 days. We don't want our candidates to be in process for 90 days, right? That's the apply to hire over here. The below example may be a little bit more realistic. But this just, really pinpoints it how important it is to work correctly with the opening dates. So we have our time to hire and our apply to hire, which reflects the candidate experience, and we'll also have the time to onboard. So, the bottom line, how long it took us to get that start candidate to his first day at our company. We're going to go ahead and continue to our next topic. Our next topic is position fields. Why are position fields important? First of all, they give us the ability to map out our positions by department and location, and of course, additional categories. We also have the option to add custom position fields for filtering and reporting. What would we want to know, in regards to position fields? What's the question that we're going to ask? For example, how many open positions do we have per location or department? Or how many open positions does each recruiter have right now? So this is some instructions on how we recommend working with the position fields. This is another menu that is in your settings and can be reached as an owner admin of the system. We have position categories and position details. Let's take a look at the system together and see how this works. So like I mentioned before, top right-hand corner, company name, scroll down to settings, and on the left-hand side, we're going to choose position fields. So at the top, you can see that we have position categories. These are the different categories per position. We have the different default categories that come with the system, such as department, employee type, employment, location, and seniority. And below, we have the position details. What also comes built in is description and requirement. So the details are the free text fields that show up on your career website and on job boards. And the position categories also, they can be public for job boards, they can be internal. The default ones will show on job boards, as you can see here. So just as a start, we're all going to go into the department category. And our recommendation is to change this to a drop-down field, which means just like we saw in step templates, there's a basic menu that everyone needs to choose from. You can't add a name of a department every time you open the position. You can't choose the different department names or create duplicates or mistakes in the system. And this is also a good part of Comeet that allows you to customize the system to your needs. So you can add here your department names. You can click on it to rename it and select rename. You can remove a specific department if you don't have it at your company. And adding multiple options is really easy. You can just paste the list and it will automatically create all of the different options. So that's the first thing we recommend doing. In addition, I want to point out that you have the option to add your own categories. It could be maybe internal departments. It could be a company code that you're using per positions. You could do it by HRBP. There's really a lot of different options. Every company needs their own categories. So by adding a category, you'll give it a field name. You'll decide if it's internal, meaning it'll only show up in Comeet. You can decide that it's public and will be on job boards, and you can decide that it's public on your career website, but not on job boards. And our recommendation for this is always going to be to use a drop-down option, right? Because we want to be able to analyze reports, and if we don't have a unified list of options, then our reports will just be a mess and they won't be reliable. In addition, you can also decide that specific categories are required to publish, meaning that if a recruiter is opening a position, they will need to fill out this field. So just a tip for me, marking the drop-down for department required to publish, and the location, which will already probably be required to publish in your system, this is the best way to ensure that all of your reports will necessarily be aligned by location and department, something really basic that you'll want to see in all of your different reports. You can just see an example here that I've added in my demo. I've added a category called experience, and I've mapped it out to different levels of experience. It's an internal use field, it's a drop down, and every position that I open, I can decide which category it falls under. Let's talk about position details. So position details are the free text fields that we have. You can see that description and requirements will come in the system, but you might want to add additional ones like responsibilities or benefits, advantages. You can really add here whatever you want, and it will show up on your career website and job boards. The description one will always need to be the first one, but the rest have the option to drag and drop if you want to sort of organize it a little bit differently. And this is where you'll click Add Details. You'll decide again if it's an internal use field, public for job boards, or only for your career website. Let's see a quick example of how it looks in a position. So everything we just saw will always be under the position description. And if you're an owner admin in the system, the Customize button right over here will allow you to jump back to the position fields menu to organize it or edit anything you need. At the top, you'll see all of the different categories. We have our location set up, our department, we have employment full-time, seniority intermediate, employee type is outsourced in this case. You can see that our internal fields are locked, meaning that only for internal use. And I'm not going to get into salary too much right now because that's a whole topic, but just so you know, salary range is completely internal. It's not shown at any place, not on job boards, not on your career site. And the only person who has access to salary details in Comeet is the position recruiter and the owner admin of the system. For anyone who's using the EEO category, this is where you're going to go ahead and mark it. And as you can see here, I have my custom position field experience, and I've marked this position in the category of 2 to 4 years experience. We also have the work from home field. This is something, let's say, that's relevant for the past year. So now specific job boards are supporting this field, and you can fill it out accordingly. I'm just going to also remind you that you can change the public name to be different from the position name. So if you have an internal naming for this position and you'd like to post this position and publish it with a different name, you can do that as well. Below, we have the description, the requirements. You can see here the option to add responsibilities and benefits, and the brief to team field is an internal field for you just write comments internally for your teammates that are on the hiring team. Last but not least, I want to show that you can filter and group your open positions in your main screen by these different custom position fields. For example, if I want to group by location, I can also group by experience, right, which is my custom position field. So this can really be helpful for looking at how many positions are open and the different categories. If I want to do it by department, maybe I also want to do it by location. So going back to the presentation, just a few screenshots of what we covered together. I'm going to recommend that you all go into your position fields, mark the department as a drop down, make sure you have any other categories that you want to add and that everything matches what you need in terms of the position description and any other categories that you'd like to use for filtering. Okay, next topic. This is also a big one. There's a lot of different scenarios and details here, so you need to pay attention. In really a lot of cases, we'll see candidates moving between positions. There's a bunch of different options for this. A candidate can start in one position, we'll CV screen them, have a phone call with them, and then realize that they're a better fit for a different position. We also have scenarios where we have a really great candidate and we actually have 2 positions that potentially could be a good match. So we're going to have them go through 2 parallel processes at the same time. And of course, we have that case where a candidate was considered in the past, maybe they were rejected and now they have more experience and they're more relevant. Maybe they withdrew their candidacy and they heard so many great things about us that they changed their mind, they want to come and work for us now. So we have all of these different scenarios, and the options in the system are also different. So let's go through the different options, the different scenarios, and what we need to know in terms of reporting. So the reason this is so important, first of all, is obviously the answer that you already know, reports. We want to make sure that there's correct documentation for reports, both on a candidate level and a position level. We want to be able to see which steps a candidate completed and which candidates completed which steps on a position level as well. In addition, we want to be able to manage the data and the documentation of past and current data per candidate. So this is actually a really, really important topic. So let's go through some of the scenarios. The first scenario is called a change position. In this case, we're going to be deciding that a candidate who started out in position A is actually a better fit for position B. So in this case, we're going to go into the candidate card. We can see here the 3 dots over here and click change position. Once we click change position, this candidate is going to be leaving the current position that he's in. He's going to go into a new position. We can also decide which step he's going to start out from there, and we're moving him to a different position. He will not have 2 processes, but only 1 process in 1 candidate card. Now you have to keep in mind that the steps here will be documented per position. If in position A, he completed a CV screen and a phone screen, and then he moved to position B and started out there from an interview manager, then the steps will be documented per the position. So for each one of you that are using our activity report, for example, this is where you'll see the gaps in the numbers, because not all the candidates started out at the beginning and finished the process. Some were either added to specific steps or removed from specific steps. So this has an impact on reporting. Another thing that you want to keep in mind is that the apply to hire for the candidate will be the initial application date. So if these are 2 processes that there was a long time between them, someone started a process 2 years ago and now you're moving them to another process, this isn't the use case for this. Okay, this is really if something is happening within the past couple of weeks. I talked to a candidate last week. I did a phone screen. I discussed it yesterday with the hiring manager. We decided that he's a better fit for a different position. And now I'm going to change position and start the process over there. So that's the use case for this. Make sure that you're not doing this, like I mentioned, for processes that it's been a long time since they last started or they've been completed already. The other scenario is adding to another position. This is also done from the candidate card, okay, from the 3 dots over here, and I'm going to choose add position. And the same screen is going to pop up, essentially. It's going to ask me what position I'm adding this candidate to and the step that I want to add it to. Now, the difference between this and the previous scenario is that in this case, the candidate will have multiple processes, 2 parallel processes that are happening at the same time. We'll have a documentation of one position and a documentation of another position. The steps will be completed in the parallel positions, and everything will be documented separately. Another thing to notice here is that the apply to hire will be calculated from the beginning of each process. Okay, so this is not looking back at their first process. If I've moved a candidate, added him to another position, now the apply to hire will be counted again from the time he was added to this new position. So how will this appear in reports? You'll see that you have 2 candidates in 2 different positions according to the different steps that they've completed. We're still going to be counting the steps per position, so you'll be able to see that within the positions. And as I mentioned, the apply to hire is from the beginning of each process. Don't worry, I'm going to show you some examples in the system in just a minute. Another scenario that I want to address here is the change status for a candidate. Sometimes, like I said before, a candidate that has been rejected or withdrawn in the past will be now relevant for a new position or for a new process. Could be maybe for the same position, it could be for a new one. And sometimes we make a mistake. Sometimes we'll mark rejected or withdrawn by accident, and then we'll need to go back and fix it. If you need to fix a mistake in the system, it happens to all of us. You're going to want to go to the status and choose back in progress. And then a window pop-up will show up, and you'll choose undo the last status change because you're deleting the record of him being rejected or withdrawn, and you're continuing as usual from the process. If we're talking about a candidate that was once withdrawn or rejected, and you want to move them back into progress, the best practice is to add them to another position and start their process from the beginning, meaning start a new hiring process. If you're undoing the last status change for candidates that you're now moving into process, you're essentially deleting all the data that we had about their rejection or withdrawn decisions previously. And we really want to make sure that we're not forgetting any of this data or deleting it from the system. So that's why if you're taking a candidate and, as we say, reviving them, you're going to want to choose to start a new hiring process. So let's show you some examples of the system, and then we're going to go on to our last topic. So here, for example, I can see Katie McKenzie. She's in the hiring process for account executive. She's at the interview manager step. And let's say I've decided that I want to move her to a different position. She's not a good fit for the account executive. I'm going to choose the 3 dots, choose change position. And now I will be moving her, for example, to the customer success manager position. Now, obviously, she's been through several steps, so you can, straight send her to the on-site demo. You'll also see a preview of where she's going to be starting the process, and you'll click change position. Once I click change position, you'll see that the candidate card is updated with the current step. And if I want to go back to the all activity filter, I'll be able to see everything that happened to this specific candidate. But as you can see, it's not 2 different processes. It's one process, started out in position A and continued in position B. Another example is Anna Miller. Anna Miller is in the phone screen step for the data integration manager. And after speaking to her, I think she's a really great fit for another position, and I want to have her go in 2 parallel processes. In this case, I'm going to click on the 3 dots, choose add to another position. So I'm adding her to another process. And I'm going to go ahead and add her to the QA manager position. Again, here, it's probably a good idea to choose the first step. That way, the reports will be a little bit more organized. You'll be able to see the funnel in a much more clear and obvious way. It's up to you how to manage this. You can decide to go ahead and skip and send her to the CV screen manager step and click add. Now, once I click add, you can see that now I have a new banner because now there's 2 candidate cards. There's one for the data integration manager where we started out, and now I have another candidate for the QA manager because she has 2 different processes that are parallel. Below in her candidate card, in both of them, under the positions tab, you'll be able to see that she is currently in 2 processes, and the banner on top will always remind you that this candidate has another process. Last but not least, we have Danielle Jackson. She was rejected a week ago, and we've decided to bring her back into progress. We can go ahead to the rejection and change in progress. And this is the pop-up that I mentioned. We could either undo the last status change because it was a mistake and we're fixing it. If we want to bring her into a new process, we'll click start a new process. We'll change the status. Okay, and now what happens is that the position that she was in, we're starting it all over again. Okay, so that's how it works when we're changing the status. So now you have the 3 cases, and you can decide how to work with them. Okay, on to our last topic, and then we're going to have some Q&A. Last topic for today is the disposition reasons. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this topic. The reason why disposition reasons are so important because we want to make sure that we have the option to identify opportunities to improve our hiring processes. We want to get a better understanding of why candidates are rejected and at what step. And of course, analyze the data and understand why candidates are withdrawing and at what step. The different questions that we're probably going to be asking around this topic are, when was the candidate rejected? Why were there so many candidates rejected at a specific step? Were the recruiter and the hiring manager on the same page when screening CVs? Because if we can see that many candidates were rejected in the CV screen manager step, maybe they need to have a quick conversation and align the expectations and what they're looking for in candidates. Whereas there may be a step in the process that caused many candidates to be rejected. For example, maybe we have a technical test that is in the advanced stages, but that only 10% of candidates pass this step. Maybe that's a step we want to bring up in the beginning of the process and avoid, wasting candidates' time as well as our own. So disposition reasons can really teach us a lot. Our recommendation is to go into the system settings, go to your dispositions menu, and make sure that you review the list and see if it really matches what you're using. You can edit them, you can add them. And here I'm just gonna, share some of my tips is that in many cases, we're seeing companies use the doesn't meet minimum qualifications reason. And that's really a valid reason, but it doesn't really teach us enough about the hiring process. Our strong recommendation is to break these general reasons into more specific ones: not technical enough, not analytical enough, wasn't interested in the job location, decided to stay at current company. You can really have a wide variety of reasons. And this is also a good point in time to get your hiring managers and interviewers involved. Have a short discussion with them, see what kind of reasons they're looking to enter into the system, because the more specific they are, the more we'll be able to learn and analyze them in the data and in our reports. Of course, we don't want to have too many of them, but definitely go into this menu, and don't forget at the top, mark it as required. This is probably even more important than having different reasons, is to make sure that they're required, so you will necessarily have the data regarding rejections and withdrawn candidates. So the disposition reasons, we're going to use them a lot when we're rejecting a candidate at the go, no-go step. You can see here that this is the drop-down that will show up for your managers and yourself when you're rejecting a candidate. And this is just a quick snapshot of one of our reports. You can all go into your Comeet Insights, and under the workflow folder on the left, you'll have two reports called rejected and withdrawn. And these reports are really interesting because not only will you be able to see the breakdown of the different candidates and how many were rejected or withdrawn for different reasons, you'll also be able to see at what step this happened, what source they came from, for which department and position this happened, and filtered accordingly. So it's really an interesting report. I really recommend that you start using it. Just make sure to mark this as required and edit the different reasons as well. Great, last slide. Thank you for making it up until here. We're gonna have a Q&A in just a second. Just to summarize sort of our topics for today. Correct data documentation and data alignment will definitely assure accurate reporting. You can only count on your reports for being reliable if the data is accurate, if it was documented at the right point in time, and if you're all documenting, for example, the hire date as the date that the candidate signed the contract, and not every recruiter marking the hire date, which signals different things. So really, once you have this time to align the data and align your team to best practices, you'll be able to see the reports are more organized and more clear. And of course, this will help you create unified hiring processes. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that you can go back and edit, just like we talked about the openings, goes for the other topics that we discussed. You have the option to decide you want to align your data for Q2. You want to put a goal and align your team and move forward with this kind of implementation. This will be a really great way to get your reports ready as soon as possible. And don't forget that really using your data correctly will allow you to leverage your ability to analyze it and improve your KPIs. Great, so before we go into Q&A, I'm just gonna launch a quick poll now. It'd be really great if you could all take literally 10 seconds and answer the poll. We really always wanna have feedback from our users regarding our webinars. We wanna be able to improve and see that we're answering your expectations. I can see 30% of you voted, so let's make sure we have some more votes in, and then we'll get started with Q&A. If you've already voted, this is a great time to go into the Q&A on the webinar and write your questions. Okay, gonna give you another 10 seconds to vote. Okay, great. Let's go into some Q&A. Great. So let's see what our questions are for today. Okay, so how do I change an opening, 1 out of 3 openings for a specific role in a specific location to another location? So this is a good question because this also connects to how we should manage different openings and different positions. In what case do we have multiple positions, and in which case we have one position with multiple openings? The idea of an opening per position is that it is the same position with several openings, meaning it's the same hiring team, it's the same location and same department. Let's see in a quick example. So if I'm going to the marketing director position, if I go to the description, you can see that this position is in Australia and it's in the marketing department. All of the candidates that are applying to this position will be relevant for the Australia location and for the marketing department. If I want to hire several marketing directors for the same location and same department, I'll want to have an additional opening. But in the case that I'm hiring another marketing director for a different location and a different department, that's going to be the use case where you go ahead and you open a new position. So I hope I answered that question. Let's see if we have some more questions. So we have another user asking about how to clean up the system. Someone who's been using the system for a really long time and the step templates is just one big mess. So this is a really good question because we have this, coming up from a lot of our users that have been with us for a while now. And the answer is that you shouldn't be afraid of a little challenge. It's actually not as hard as it seems. You can get your recruitment team together, go over the list, identify which one are redundant and not used anymore, which one basically mean the same thing. And it's okay for you to have different steps that will be relevant for different recruiters. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the menu answers all of their requirements and is aligned in terms of the hiring processes. It won't take you more than 30 minutes to get it aligned, and I'm sure you'll see the benefit right away in reports. Okay, let's see some more questions. So when I need to remove a candidate from one position who is a candidate for multiple positions, what is the best way to do that without messing up the other positions? So in this case, it's best to manage multiple processes for this candidate. If they're not a good match for one position, you can reject them there, decide to let them know about it, yes or no, and keep managing their other processes. And as you can see, we'll always have all of the documentation of the candidate processes. Even if I have a candidate that's been in multiple positions, they've applied multiple times, under the positions tab, I'll be able to scroll down and see which positions they're in progress for. Let's see another example over here. So if they've applied again, if they have additional processes or duplications, we'll always be able to see it in the positions tab. So I would definitely, wouldn't erase anything, wouldn't delete a candidate from the system. Anything you delete, we can't find it again. So don't make sure not to do that. Is there any way to list a job with one or more openings when the job position is being created? So of course, basically what interests the candidate is the position. So you're not going to be posting on job boards or on your career website how many openings there are unless you want to add it to the text. Every time you open a position, as we saw together, one opening will be created, and you can always add as more as you want. Okay, let's see if we've answered all of our questions. I have another question here about the brief to team field. What is it used for? So the brief to team field is under the position description, and it's right here, as you can see below. The brief to team is just a really nice place to enter any kind of internal comments you want about this position, maybe tips for interviewers, maybe things you want to ask them to keep in mind when interviewing. It's completely up to you. Make sure to notice that it's visible to all teammates that are part of the hiring team. Okay, last question. What does the required to publish mean in the position field? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we saw together that we have the different categories here. If you decide to mark this as required to publish, that means that each recruiter will be required to choose a department every time they open up a position before they actually publish it on your career site and job boards. And that's a really good tip because that way there's not a chance that you'll be missing positions without departments and locations. This is really important. Just going to add here that location is not only required to publish on a Comeet level, but that most job boards won't post your positions without an actual location filled in. And locations is something we fill in under localization over here. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. I'm just gonna log on over here to say bye to everyone. It's really great to have you join us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and taking part in our webinar. As I mentioned, we're gonna send all of you the recording and also your colleagues that registered and couldn't make it. And we are meeting in 2 weeks for an additional webinar. We're launching our new open position dashboard report. We're really excited about this. We've built this report from a lot of your feedback that's come up, and this report will really help you dive into a specific position, get a better understanding of the status, what's happened in the past week, where these candidates are coming from in terms of sources, and identify your bottlenecks and where your next steps should be in terms of hiring. And in 1 month from today, we're going to be meeting for our third webinar, talking about different sources and the different reports that can help you track your candidate sources. So it was great seeing you all today. Thanks again for joining, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.